Hello and welcome back. Let's talk about these sourdough buns and how you can make them. Now making these sourdough buns is really easy. It's exactly like making a sourdough loaf, but then instead of shaping it into one loaf, you're dividing that dough into several parts and then making small little loaves, which will then be your sourdough buns, and these taste delicious. I'm gonna put a recipe for you in the description box below so that you can print it from our website. This is my normal sourdough loaf recipe, and all I'm doing is changing the way that I am shaping my loaves near the end, and then the time that I bake the buns for at the end. But the rest is standard and pretty much the same, and so I'm going to take you through a quick tutorial on how I feed the sourdough starter, mix the dough, and then shape these little buns so that they're ready for baking. Now with all sourdough baking, you're going to start by feeding your starter. This is just giving that animal, as we call it, a little bit of food so that it can be ready and active for the time that we mix this recipe and we want it to take over the dough. I'm going to mix the flour and the water and let that autolyze for 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'm going to add the salt and the yeast and mix the dough completely. Now you're going to want to leave this dough to sit for a little while. I usually do it overnight, and I give all the directions for how to do that in the recipe. And during that time that it is fermenting overnight, you need to apply at least 4 folds. And what that is I'll come back 4 times and reach my hands underneath the dough and kind of stretch it upwards and fold it over top of itself so that it's creating these elastic layers as I'm pulling the dough and folding it over top of itself 4 times over this long period of fermentation. That's just going to help it build up gases and gluten structures so that the bread rises really nicely. Now the next day, or if you're doing it the same day many hours later, you're going to divide the dough. Now this is kind of tricky because, the way you help the dough out of the bucket onto your countertop, you're being very careful, but it's just this blob of dough on your countertop, and it can be hard to get many small little dough balls with exactly the same size and weight. And so I just kind of guess and use my little cutting tool to cut the dough in a few sections. I'm just doing some guesswork here. Later on I did another take of this recipe where I actually did the dough into much smaller sizes. And then this is what you're seeing right here, and I'm actually very happy with this size. And there's lots of loaves here. I mean, these are a bit too small. So I would say that you could probably divide this recipe into, let's see, 20 to 25 rolls of dough. You can play with it and test it depending on how big of rolls you want. And then you would do what you normally do with your loaf, is pull the edges up, again fold it over top of itself, and then plop it onto your countertop and start shaping the loaf. And I'm just gently pulling towards myself, and I'm the dough toward me, which will kind of tighten up the bottom part of the dough, and then I'm turning it clockwise about 1/4 ways, and then pulling down again, and then turning it another 1/4 and pulling again. And doing this a few times will start tightening up the dough and just really feel good. You can feel the ball kind of firming up and forming a nice roll. Now normally for this recipe, your large sourdough loaf you would leave for 4 hours to proof, depending on what season it is. Of course, when it's hotter, this happens quicker, so the way I test it is just a little finger dent test where I would poke the dough, and if it springs back at me, it's not fully proofed yet, but if it's slow to come back and almost doesn't come back, and I can see where I left my finger, then I know this is about time to really get baking. It's not best to bake this dough in Dutch ovens because they just create this enclosed space where these delicious artisan buns come out. So, I mean, it's difficult to bake this many buns in a round sourdough pot like I normally do. Or if you've got an oven pan or an oven dish that has a lid, that's perfect. But I have trialed it just with using my Dutch ovens in and out of the oven, adding a few rolls, covering it up, bringing it back out. It just takes much longer, so you can see whatever works well for you, but I can tell you that the normal pans, just covering it with tin foil, work just as well if you have something like that. So these little buns bake for about 25 minutes, and then I remove the tin foil or the lid and bake it for another 10 minutes until they're nice and brown at the top. And that's how easy it is to make these delicious sourdough buns. I hope that you are also excited about sourdough and its health benefits and just tasty, good, real bread. If you like content like this, please stick around. I make a few videos about things that are going on in our kitchen or out in our garden, or when we go on trips, how we prepare for camp trips or boat trips. So if you're into any of that, we'd love to have you stick around and maybe catch some of our upcoming videos. Alright, I'll see you. Bye.